Hello there, everyone. This is CD-Mangaka here. Maybe I'll come to a point where I don't have to introduce myself like that anymore, but hey, for now, I'm going to stick with it. Today, Riot released their 5.5 patch notes, and I wanted to go over the notes myself and kind of talk about these, like the overarching things that I expect to see happening in both in solo queue as well as in competitive play, because there's a lot of changes happening in this patch, and I also wanted to just share my own feelings on it. I might as well start off with that. I think it's going to be a pretty good patch. I think it's going to be really crazy as far as the competitive scene goes because there's a lot of like really big changes coming on. I think there's going to be a lot of testing, and we don't know where things are going to land. That's why I'm going to like phrase everything, all my predictions, quote unquote, as I think it's can happen. Nothing I say here, I'm not trying to call anything. I'm not saying that this is definitely going to happen. Expect to see this. No. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. Instead, I'm just going to try and reasonably figure out what could potentially happen and hypothesize it, and then see. And then when the pros do their own testing and their own experiments, we'll see if it actually happens. So that's the whole gist of it. Without further ado, I'm going to change the video screen now so that we get into the patch itself. And so we can take a look at that. So I'm going to close this down. So this is the patch page. Everybody can come here and view it. So there's some champion buffs. There's a lot of that. Bard is released in there. The only thing I'm going to say about that is, based on looking at his kit, I've done it briefly, but I get like the overall gist of him. I think that it's going to take a while for teams to pick him up just because he doesn't come off as really too lane dominant. To me, at least. He kind of is more there for like setting up these really cool plays in the late game. I think with the roaming support meta as it is right now, he's going to be a great pickup for it. But it's going to take a while for players to really get a feel for him and see how he does. I think there'll be some experimentation, but I think that like with the delay in Callista, it might take a couple of buffs before we start seeing him played, and then like he'll be scaled back or nerfed because that's what always happens. It seems like. So a bunch of changes coming up here. The things I really wanted to talk about in particular were Kassadin, because Kassadin has always been an issue competitive play. I'm not going to talk about Veigar a whole lot because I think Riot's is trying to ease up. They went a little too ham with the nerfs to Veigar, which they're undoing a couple of them, or I should say they're sticking with their changes, which I do like the direction of the change, but I think they're finally trying to zero on the actual tuning that they want. Kassadin is going to be a main topic point for me. All the jungle stuff is going to be like the new jungle item, jungle changes to champions. That's going to be the thing for me to talk about. And then the Righteous Glory change, because a lot of people are like, holy shit about that. But then like these shield and tower and minion, all those changes. All those changes. So a couple things I do like in the patch is the aesthetic stuff, like changing like, some of the coloring on the rift and the defeat and victory screens. I like that a lot. That's my own personal feeling. So Kassadin. To me, Kassadin has always come off as like this really problematic pick to balance, and Riot's come out and talked about this a couple times. I have to go look at the patch notes itself. But it seems like Kassadin is either completely useless or game-breakingly overpowered. I recall the days early Season 4, mid-Season 4, where he was like 100% pick ban, mostly banned because he was just that strong. I mean, it was just like really bad. And then with these last changes, like these like super nerfs to his ultimate, like he went to the shitter. Like he has like a 40% win rate or something atrocious like that. He's like bottom 3 with Urgot and Veigar. It's pretty bad. So, and yes, I have 2 different drinks. More power. So with this particular change, now that Riot's like gutted him, they're like, oh hey, let's bait some people in with a visual update. No, I'm kidding about that. Maybe, I don't know. So he's got a bit of a new particles, new looks to him, new ability icons. It all looks great. I've always been a fan of Riot's visual work in the game. But the change to his ultimate is particularly interesting, and I actually wanted to compare it to another champion who went through a similar process, which is Lucian. Back when Riot looked at nerfing Lucian, when Lucian was like the standard AD carry pick, it's like if an AD carry, if he's up, you pick him pretty much because he's pretty safe in every matchup. He does great damage. He scales pretty well. He's just a really balanced pick. And so Riot actually looked to reduce his range, but improve his mobility. They went a little overboard with that at first, if you remember the Lucian Bolt memes and jokes and gameplay videos, which are just horrible to see. It feels like they're doing a similar thing to Kassadin by reducing the range on his ultimate, but now they're reducing the cooldown on it. So it's like you go farther, or not, you have shorter jumps, but you can jump more often, and that makes up for it. So the biggest changes that happened here are pretty much this whole thing. The cooldown has been knocked down by 1 second at each rank, which means he's going to have that jump more often. And just to put this into like a late game nightmare context for you, if you get 40% CDR on Kassadin once he has his ultimate at rank 3, so it's at 2 seconds, you have your Rift Walk on a 1.4 second cooldown. The range is 500, which is 25 more than Flash. That's kind of terrifying. You have a Flash on a 1.2 cooldown, which has always been a complaint about Kassadin. It's like, oh, he's got a Flash and it's like up every so often. You know, that's like whatever. That's his shtick. They gave him 50 range back to him, which I think is okay, because then that lets him like, he doesn't have to get like with so close to an enemy AD carry to spell dash them, because there's an article in Gold Pretend, I'll shout out right now, I can't remember who did it, but it's like on the, like, I think it was Jesvin actually, on the Kassadin kill range nerf, with him losing like the range. Now for him to get close enough to Rift Walk and then use his spells, he's basically going to be stepping into an 80 carry's range. So instead of Kassadin getting the first blow off in the trade, the 80 carry can. I don't know how much this actually adjusts it, but rid of a range buff is okay. So, you know, his kneecaps, they were shot off last patch. He could only rift crawl. Now he's got some titanium buds in there, but he's never going to recover to the full length that he was. So now, you know, he can rift skip, as it were. That's some sort of horrible pun. But another interesting thing is the mana cost change. So it looks small. It's like, oh, it only lost 10 mana. But if you recall how Kassadin's ultimate works, it works off of a stacking. It works off a stack system. That's actually the best way to put it. Where each stack you have on your ultimate, which stacks hold for like 20 seconds, you gain more damage on it, and the mana cost doubles. So this 10 mana cost reduction actually scales super hard, because the first cast you save 10, the second cast you save 20, the third cast you save 40, the fourth cast you save 80, and the fifth cast you save 160 mana. So that gives you more mana to cast out your spells, all of that stuff. It is still a small buff, but the fact that Kassadin already builds some mana items, like Tier, Rod of Ages, it's going to give him more spell rotations within his combo and within an expanded period of time. So that means that with more spells, he can cast Riftwalk more often, or All In more often, and it's going to be a buff to him. So I'll be interested to see if Kassadin, with these changes, like, goes back to being that super overpowered 100% ban rate pick, or like that always prevalent, always strong pick, or if he's going to settle down and he'll be kind of like become like a more like a comfortable pick where you can pick him up sometimes, but you know there's reasons that you don't do it, you know. So I don't know if he'll be healthy or not. Here's hoping. So the next big change that I want to particularly talk about was the jungle changes. So Riot has been finally being like, all right, we're sorry, we've been messing up the jungle. We know that strategic diversity has been mean, but it's actually like done ironically because we fucking failed at it. They didn't put it quite like that. But now we're gonna actually embrace, like, not embrace. We're gonna actually pursue it better, and we're gonna be buffing tanks. So they have Balmy Cinder, which costs about 1,000 gold, and it has this passive on it, which deals bonus damage to minions and monsters. So I wouldn't be surprised if they got rid of the minion damage, in all honesty, just because like that's going to be pretty good for top lane champions, even though like they're going to be building Sunfire Cape out of it anyway, rather than Cinderhulk enchantment, because it looks like, yeah, it loses the bonus damage to monsters once you build it, but it's still stronger. So this is supposed to help junglers clear, and actually I think this is probably the best quote-unquote tank jungle item, quote-unquote best I should say actually, because it's supposed to be a tank item. I don't know why I'm quoting that. This is probably going to be the best item for them to help them clear, because before you had Quillcoat, which had like this, like when monsters are attacking you, it deals like a certain amount of damage back to them rather than like this static burn to them, and also it had like a bit of sustain to it. I think this item might be the best items in the jungle that junglers may have seen, just to help them clear. It's still not going to kick in though until like you actually buy the item. That is a thing, and this one concept I've been outspoken about is that if tank junglers clear like sucks at level 1 to like level 5 before they can get this item, this isn't going to do shit to help them, because until they have the item, they don't benefit from it. If you wanted to, like, if that's where the problem issue for tank junglers is that level 1 clear, which probably isn't going to be the case because you'll have some pots to start off there, you're going to get a pretty good leash, hopefully. In competitive play, you are, pretty much. So if you do it like that, then you're going to basically be okay, and it's not going to be an issue. Then you'll get your second spell, and you'll probably get into the groove of it. But if you start falling off in like the level 4 to 5 range, around the mid game where you're building up for your target items and things like that, if that's where the issue is and where bruisers are really beginning to outclass junglers in terms of clear speed, then this item will cover that and they'll be able to keep pace with the bruisers. Okay. The Cinderhulk enchantment is also a return to an old approach to the jungle item. It has less health, but it gives extra health as for more you build. So for every 100 points of bonus health you get an extra 25 for it, which is actually something that Riot mentioned as far as the Righteous Glory changes go. And it also has like the Immolate passive still, and then it ramps up over time in combat. So now tanks are getting more damage from this item. So for the first time, building an item actually gives tanks more damage. I'm not sure how I feel about that approach, simply because Stonewall has related this in an article before. It's on his, I think, I quoted it before in an article, and he said, like, if you buff the damage of tanks, then you're not going to widen the jungle pool, you're just going to shift it to tanks. Because if a tank could kill a champion in the time that they can lock them down, that's not a healthy state for the game, and then they're just going to replace the bruisers. Because if you want to have diversity in the jungle, every jungle class has to do a different thing. So tanks lock down, apply a lot of CC, great disruption, but the damage is supposed to be a little bit negligible. Which I don't think that this Cinderhulk enchantment is going to like suddenly make them like do as much damage as a Lee Sin, because I mean, come on, it's just not going to be like that. But that's like the trend that Riot is pushing them towards, rather than like helping out their early clear speed so they can farm the jungle a little better, get a little more gold out of it, things like that. Still, I'm not bashing on this item too hard. I'm waiting to see what actually happens. And ultimately, it's a good change. I feel like I'd be interested to see whether or not they actually go back to giving tenacity instead. I think Meteos made a tweet about it. He said he'd always prefer the tank jungle item giving tenacity rather than bonus health. It's just always felt better to him. So I'd be curious to see whether or not they would change that in the future and give like 150 health back to the item anyway. So that'll be something interesting to see. I'll talk about Luden's Echo in a moment. With the jungler changes, Nautilus has some buffs coming in. And I talk about the trend. So Nautilus actually loses some damage to mitigate his clear, because he's going to be building the Braum Cinder, and that's going to help him out. So they're kind of like preemptively nerfing it, so he just doesn't become into a mega clearing thing. The shield amount is actually buffed by his maximum health, so it's going to last longer. His E actually has a pretty substantial buff to it. The cooldown is reduced, and it scales down. But the slow duration is nerfed a little bit. It's lost some of the ability power ratio, but the mana cost has also gone down. So ultimately, this changes the spell to being a lot more disruptive in a team fight, because you have a lot more opportunities to use it. So that's actually a pretty big buff to his late game. Skarner's got more damage. This is kind of where I talked about, where it's like, okay, Skarner's doing a lot of damage, but he's going to be building tanky, so he does a lot of damage, but he's also going to be building tanky, which tanks do and should have a pretty good base damage to them. Hell, when you see a bruiser build, pretty much, like they start off with the 1 damage item, but then they transition to like a full tank build. So if we put the damage into like a champion's kit rather than into the item that they pick up, then to me that's okay. But if they can then build damage on top of that, then that's just like a problem. So saying that, Skarner will still like have the mobility creep issues, which is something that bruisers will always have an advantage on over some of these tank junglers. That's just my opinion. Well, actually, it's a bit of my opinion unless some big changes come in. I mean, like, J4 and Lee Sin can both jump over walls without burning flash. Nautilus can't do that. Skarner can't do that. Amumu can't do that. Just by themselves, without interacting with the enemy champion. I should phrase it like that, because Amumu could manage us over. Trundle buff, Vi nerf. Volibear clearing buff, reduce half the fun of the cooldown. I kind of like this change, but again, mobility creep is still an issue. Xin Zhao, a little more sustain in the jungle. That's okay. A little more damage on his E. That's fine. Zac has a cooldown mechanic. They're adjusting it a little bit. I actually want to understand this because I haven't looked at it before. So, pardon me while I do this. Ultimately, though, Riot's giving a lot of buff to tanks, and they're not nerfing any, like the bruisers as a whole, which I think is good. So, to me, hopefully, what that will do, is that it's going to help the tanks out, but it's not going to, like, push the bruisers off to the side, so then there's a reason to pick between the two. Which, I've always talked about this as well. That the jungle pool will kind of be limited because the top lane pool is limited. There's a lot of champions that you can share between them. Maokai, back in the day, when he was jungle, now he's top lane. Hecarim is coming into the top lane now instead of going into the jungle with his buffs. With top lane being limited to pretty much either AP mages, like Lissandra, Lulu, Kennen as of recently, or tanks, like it's harder to justify picking a tank in the jungle even if a tank was pretty good. So we could see that these like in solo queue, like all these tank buffs actually help out the jungle diversity there, because you can play shit like Riven, Tryndamere, Fiora top lane and not get just like completely wrecked by a lane swap. But in competitive play, because we are seeing more AP carries come out, Kennen, like I mentioned, Lissandra's kind of up there as well. Kassadin can be played there as well. Then you could probably see like a more effective tank come out of the jungle actually. So there is that. That's like the world where, to me, in competitive play, a tank in the jungle would be played more often. But there's still the question of the jungle is still pretty far behind as far as the rewards it gives. And with tanks looking to make less plays than a bruiser, as well as being more item reliant than a bruiser, or level reliant and item reliant than a bruiser can, because a bruiser, like the thing that we've seen with some champions, that they can thrive on a low economy style, like Lee Sin. Like, you don't need items to pull off an insect kick. Okay, like that's always going to have the utility that it has. Tanks might still be more effective in the top lane, in all honesty. And heck, we could even see Nautilus go up top after his changes. We don't know. So, Zach gives a reservoir of CDR. I'm not sure how that works. I don't quite understand that change yet, but either way. So I guess they're ultimately giving buffing Zach's cooldown stuff so that he'll have his W up more often, which helps his clear speed. Which that's a really clever way of actually helping his clear speed. It's like fiddling with the cooldowns and stuff and making it really unique and interactive. So, and they not increase the knockup duration on Z. I think that's okay. So tanks might come back into the meta. Riot thinks that Amumu and Sejuani could be really overpowered just because they have such great AoE clear with Amumu's tier. Well, with both of their Ws actually, funnily enough. So we'll see how that goes. They might need some tuning on there, because if a tank can just clear the jungle faster than a bruiser, then that's a problem. So jungle hopefully improves. I think it's going to improve greatly for solo queue, and that those tank junglers will be in a much better state. But in competitive play, we might not see that just because of how top lane is restricted, although there are cases where we could see that. But how effective it actually will be, we'll have to wait and see, because the jungle still gives pretty shit golden experience. On top of that, though, the jungle has also been nerfed as far as like how hard it is. So jungle camps like Gromp has lost 7 damage, Large Raptor has lost 10 damage, Small Raptor has lost 4 damage, so that's a total of 14 damage out of that camp. And then like the wolves give more gold, which is kind of nice. And then Gromp's buff has been changed as well to include bonus, to shift towards bonus health, so bruisers benefit less from it, but tanks benefit more from it. I think that's actually a really good change. So along with like tanks having a easier time clearing with their own spells, they're going to take less damage from it. And actually, this might like breathe up like the shackles of some junglers who are barely getting through. I wouldn't mind seeing some early game aggressive junglers like Kha'Zix come back in, for example, and at least be a viable option. Because that way, then we ride the pooling up for everybody. So then it's like, hey, Kha'Zix can come back in the jungle again, but we also have tanks you can play. I'm hoping that happens. Hard to call that yet, though. So we'll have to wait and see, as it were. The next thing I want to talk about that's actually a really big change is the Luden's Echo item. So this is effectively the static shiv for AP champions. It's a 120 AP item, and it gives 7% movement speed, and it has the charge effect where you build up a charge as you move or casting a spell. And once you get to 100 charges, your next spell that will hit, it will expend all the charges to deal 100 base damage plus 15% of your ability power bonus damage up to 4 of the targets on hit, and it will apply spell effects. They mention Akali, they mention Lux, and they mention Karthus for this item, and they talk about this filling the void that Deathfire Grasp left, but I don't want to let that particular choice of wording confuse anybody, because it's not going to be built by the same champions who will build a Deathfire Grasp, okay? Because it feels a completely different niche. It's just filling in the spot, as it were, and giving another item. So to me, this item is going to be used for those spell-slinging mages, like they use in their own publication. So I could see Orianna be using it a little bit because she has really low cooldowns. It could like cast several spells. Bit of a poke there. Azir possibly could use it. Like, he's pretty immobile as a champion to begin with, so he could actually gain from that. It would depend on how, if his soldiers could proc it or not, or his Q. That actually might be a really good item for him. I think this is going to put Ahri back into a moment of, like, overpowered tier for a moment, and I wouldn't be surprised if she would have to be rebalanced around this item, because you look at it, and it just screams Ahri. At least it screams Ahri to me. Like, extra 7% movement speed. She has a movement speed buff on her Q, so that's going to make her even more kiteable. And then it amplifies your poke by like a shit ton. Okay, not a shit ton, but it's going to amplify the effectiveness of her poke. So if one of you gets hit by a Q, you're all going to take a bit of extra damage from it. So long range mages, Lux, maybe Syndra. I'd be a little more iffy about that one, to be honest. I see this being a problem with Ahri, though, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ahri got nerfs after it, just because like Riot's already nerfed that aspect of her kit, and this item seems to kind of bring her back to that old state. So maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. If it happens, I called it, but if it doesn't, then hey, I was wrong, and that's okay. So a couple other changes. Righteous Glory got an extra 150 health. A lot of people are like, holy crap, and that pushes it to really good tier. To give you context over this, Warmogs gives 900 health, so this is a little just kind of short of that. Sunfire Cape gives 450, so it has a lot more health than Sunfire Cape. Randuin's Omen gives 500, so now it has more health than a Sunfire Cape. How much does Rod of Ages give? I'm actually curious about that. So... yeah, I spelled that completely well. I want to look at that. Because if there's basically only a handful of items that give more health than Righteous Glory, then I can see where people are coming in with that, like, holy crap, it's going to be pretty OP. So it gives the same health as Rod of Ages fully stacked, if that's an updated form. So that's actually a pretty big buff to it. I'm seeing that now. So it's going to be better, and it's going to even be stronger because of the bonus health on the Cinderhulk enchantment, pretty much. So there's that to consider as well. All right, so the next big thing, and this is probably the biggest implication to competitive play that is in any of these things, is the turret changes. So the first two sets of turret changes are similar. Inhibitor turrets and Nexus turrets are going to give like pretty much no amount of gold on kill, because Riot's argument for this is that taking the inhibitor turret is like opening up the enemy's base. So like there's a huge reward in that, and there is. So they want to take out the gold from it because that's more like a win mechanic. It's like, yeah, your base is exposed, now we can go in, try and take that inhibitor whenever we want. We don't have to worry about trying to siege up on that tower and take tower damage, and we also got a bunch of gold for it. And XP. So they completely got rid of the experience, and they also got rid of like most of the gold coming out of it, 125 gold. So, okay, that's makes it a little less snowbally. Same thing with the Nexus turrets, lost 100 gold there, no Team Global experience there as well. So if like you're pushing out, this is actually a pretty big change for teams that are like using minions to siege the base, and you have like an inhibitor down and you pull the enemy way towards Baron and minions are willing it on the base, because now you're not going to get this extra like level advantage, or like, well, experience advantage, I should say, and like a bunch more gold coming in just because the enemy, like, you pull the enemy out of their base. So it's a less, once again, it's a Riot attacking a win more mechanic, which I'm okay with that. So, but here's the biggest change, the two biggest changes actually. So I'll go into the shield turrets in a minute. Minion health is being adjusted so that they're tankier throughout the game. So it's a pretty small buff to them. But let's see. So every minute and a half, every 3 minutes, melee minions get an extra 12 health than before. And cast minions get an extra 6 health than before. So within 10 minutes, after 9 minutes. So I'm trying to find an easy number. 3 minutes. Let's do 30 minutes, so 10. So at 39 minutes, minions will have an extra 60 health for range, just like an auto attack, and 120 for melee minions. So it's a small thing, but it's going to make sieging towers a little easier for teams, because the minions will be able to tank more of the damage. especially with like the Baron buff coming in, like that's like that in conjunction with this change, that's going to be a pretty substantial gig for the minions to have. So team comps based around like sieging a tower with minions, which pretty much every comp does that, as well as the split push thing, which I'm going to talk about in a second. That's going to be a really big change. So shield turrets, inner turrets. I know that Monte Cristo was kind of like, I like the shield on the inner towers, but I don't like how it gives it to the other champions. He find it quote unquote stupid. So the middle lane inner turrets no longer shield nearby champions. Okay, just the middle lane. Okay. So, and then the shield health on the top and bottom towers are still there. Okay. So, all right, I read that at first, and I didn't realize that the middle lane, it was just the mid lane losing it. So, top and mid will still have like a small shield, but it's only 30 health. To compensate for losing the shield, towers have gained an extra 300 health, the inner towers, that is. And the mid tower does not have a shielding effect, but the bottom and top towers still do have this shielding effect. So, okay. So it's a little less effective overall, though, because basically one auto attack will shatter the shield, and then the champions in the top and bottom lane will lose that shield mechanic. At least I'm assuming that's how it's going to play out, because before that's how it's been, where if the shield is down the tower, the champions don't get the shield. So basically, shields are gone, effectively. Like, I think that 30 health is just, like, 30 shield is way too low to justify having a shield. And with the death of the mid tower shield no longer being in place, then I feel like this is going to cause two things to happen. So first off, poke comps are going to become way more powerful. Way more powerful, and like snowball it with it. Because like we've seen teams, especially in Korea, play poke comps really well. Like Jin Air. You go watch a Jin Air game, you're going to find a really good poke comp played out more often than not. CJ can also play a pretty good one as well. With those changes gone, with the shields overall nerfed, especially in the mid lane, then poking down the mid lane is going to be much more effective, because you're not going to be shielding as much damage with it, especially if the enemy has a bunch of wave clear. So this is going to make games end a little shorter than before, which, hey, for the average viewer who doesn't mind, or who wants to see a quicker game, the other side smash, all right, that's fine. For the side lanes, though, with those shields being gone and nerfed to the point that they are, I feel like there's a chance for split pushing comps to really come into play, and that champions like Zed and Yasuo, provided that the kits are strong enough to enable them to do this, are going to kind of come back into play. At least on occasion, or at least as a viable side strategy. I don't know if they'll take over the meta, if everyone gets obsessed with playing them, and it finds out like, oh, holy shit, he's actually still really good, in this case he can do this still, then alright. But because there's reason why I say split push. Before you had the split push, you had a 200 health shield that you had to burn through every time you walked up the tower. That absorbed 2-3 of your auto attacks, like every time. With that gone, and basically be down to 30, now like you don't get stalled out, and like less of your time is spent chipping away at progress that you already cut back on. So when you go back, you can actually kind of go back to chipping away at it, rather than kind of like, it's like you're digging a hole, okay, and that every time you go dig the hole, you leave and you come back, and there's always a certain amount that's always filled back in, and you always have to go back through that. Now there's less of that going on, so you actually make more progress as you're digging. That's like the best analogy I could come up with. I'm no Thorin. So with split pushing being more effective taking down towers, I could see that coming back into play. However, that said, Dragon is still like a big point of contention on the map. Baron's still a big point of contention, so teams would have to be willing to give those up as the game goes on to commit to split pushing. But split pushing is going to be more rewarding than it was before. And again, like I said, poke compositions are also going to be a lot stronger, because the shields in the mid lane are going to be gone, and it's easier to get rid of the shields in the top and the bottom lane. So then teams won't have so much of opportunity to turtle as well, which you could argue is a good or bad thing. Anyways, that is my thoughts on the patch 5.5. I know it's a half-hour video just talking about those things, but there's a lot of concepts to go over. Let me find there we go. I went through all the little settings I have. So that concludes me talking about 5.5. Sorry it took so long to go through. There's going to be an article to go with this that kind of summarizes my ideas. So in case you don't watch the video, there's going to be that for you to read. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this or for reading the article. I'm excited for this patch. Let's see what happens with that. This is CD-Mangaka signing off.